Hey, I'm Shane Smith, the owner of Genesis Off-Road, and this is our overview and installation video for our dual battery kit for the second gen Toyota Tacoma. So in this video, I'm going to show you all about what comes with the kit, and we're going to go over all the details of the whole system so you'll know exactly how it works, and I'll show you step by step how to install it. So if you're handy with a wrench, and if you follow along with our step-by-step instructions, you can install this dual battery system in your truck, in your driveway, in a couple of hours. Okay, to get started, let's take a look at what comes with this kit. So you're going to get our new steel battery tray that's going to hold 2 batteries. You're going to need to get a couple of Group 34 size batteries. Now Group 34 refers to the industry standard size of the batteries, the dimensions. We need Group 34s to fit in our kit, and that's because we rotate one of the batteries 90 degrees and we put 2 batteries down in there sideways. So the Group 34 size is the biggest batteries that we can fit in there. Now on our website, we offer the Odyssey brand of batteries as well as the Full Throttle brand of batteries. Both are excellent, high quality, deep cycle AGM batteries. AGM meaning that you can drain those batteries down and then charge them back up without hurting them. So on our website, on the second gen Tacoma dual battery kit page, you'll see the option down at the bottom for selecting the correct batteries for this kit. So you're also going to get a bag of hardware that's got everything that you need to get the tray bolted down in there securely. And last, you're going to get this top plate that has all the smart isolator and all the wiring integrated into it for you already. So all of this wiring is done for you right out of the box. There's no wiring for you to do at all to install the dual battery system. So let's take a quick look at the features on this top lid here. So this has a Cole-Hersey smart battery isolator. This is a industry standard isolator that's been around for a long time in a variety of applications, very heavy duty and reliable. This is a solenoid that's rated to handle 200 amps of current flowing through it continuously, 100% of the time. And the little black box on the back side here, this is the brains of the operation. So this is a little circuit board in here that's watching the voltage levels of your batteries to decide when to connect and disconnect them for you automatically. So when this sees your engine starts up and your cranking battery is up above 13.2 volts for 2 minutes, it's going to send a signal to the solenoid to link the batteries together from the cranking battery through the solenoid to the accessory battery. At that point, they're linked together in parallel. Your batteries are combined. They're both being charged by the vehicle's alternator at the same time, and you're using the combined capacity of both batteries to run everything in the vehicle. So for example, if you're winching, you got a really hard winch pull, that demand from the winch will be coming across both batteries so that you're not just sucking one battery down so quickly. Then, when you get to your campsite, you stop for the night, you turn the engine off, maybe you've got the radio on, maybe you've got something plugged in the 12-volt outlets, maybe you got your lights on. All of those devices are going to be running from the combined capacity of both batteries at the same time, but only until they drop down to about 12.7 volts for 1 minute. Then the smart isolator will open up the contacts in the solenoid. It's going to separate the batteries. That's going to leave your cranking battery for starting the engine later, and all of your accessories that you have wired up to the power and ground bus bars here. All of these devices will continue to run from your accessory battery so that they don't drain down your cranking battery. So the whole point of this system is to make sure you can always start the engine. But you want to keep in mind that your factory fuse box is hardwired straight to your cranking battery. So all of your factory circuits are always going to run from the cranking battery. So it is still possible to leave your radio on too long, your headlights, or leave something plugged into the factory 12-volt outlet and drain down your cranking battery. So if that happens, we've got a boost feature built in here. So this momentary push button here, you press this button one time and release it. That will give you a way to manually reconnect the batteries together. So it's just like using jumper cables to jump start yourself from the power in the second battery to help start the engine. Okay, so now let's get started on the installation. Our second gen Toyota Tacoma kit, which is for the 2005 through 2015 year models, is very similar to our third gen Toyota Tacoma kit, which is for the 2016 and up Tacoma. But they are different kits, and that has to do with the amount of space we have between the headlights and the fuse box. And I'll point out some of that as we go along. So as far as tools goes, you just need a basic set of sockets and wrenches, basic hand tools, nothing fancy. But in order to bolt the tray down in place, we are going to be installing some steel nutserts. So to do that, we are going to need a 25/64 inch drill bit. So it's very important that you use the right size drill bit so that the nutserts will seat properly. So if you don't have a 25/64 drill bit, please just pause right now, run to the hardware store and get the proper size drill bit. Okay, let's get started by just pulling out the factory battery. We'll use a 10mm socket to remove the factory battery post clamps. And then use your 10mm to loosen up the factory tie-down bracket. And then we'll set the battery out of the way. The factory battery tray won't be reused. To get group 34 size batteries in here, we're going to need to move this fuse box backwards towards the firewall. Let's get started by installing these little fuse box relocation brackets to move our fuse box back about 1 inch. So to do that, we're going to remove the factory 10mm nuts that hold the fuse box in place. There's one more behind the fuse box. And we also have a 10mm bolt here on the fender. Now to get this fuse box back, we're going to lift it up over this stud here. So let's install the bracket on the back of the fuse box first so that we can get to that one. We'll move the fuse box forward as much as we can out of the way. Use the factory 10mm bolt to hold the bracket into the factory hole. The other bracket will go over the stud on the front, and we'll hold that in place with the factory nut. So with the brackets on here, let's make sure your legs, your mounting holes on the fuse box are going to line up with our little brackets. Those look good. So now we can go ahead and tighten those bolts down. Go ahead and tighten down the rear one first because that one won't be accessible once you move the fuse box. Now we'll use these 10mm flange head bolts from the hardware baggie to hold the fuse box to the new brackets. We'll tighten down the rear bracket first. It's easier to tighten up the front bracket last so that you've got a little bit of adjustability. Okay, so you'll notice over here on the fender there's a little alignment tab that goes into a hole on the fender. That's just used so the factory workers can align up the bolt with the threads on the fender. So we're just going to take a razor blade and cut this off so that'll sit against the fender a little more flush. Now, if you would prefer to, you could put a self-tapping screw here into the fender, but the fuse box is pretty sturdy. It's not going anywhere. Now, before we set our battery tray down in here, let's address a couple of other things that may cause us problems later. First off, when we set the two batteries in here, this post clamp may be kind of difficult to reach up and over the top of the battery. So to get a little bit more slack on this line here, we're going to remove this 10mm bolt right down here, securing this wire harness, and that'll give us a little bit more slack on the length of this wire harness. We'll move this bracket out of the way, and then we'll just reinstall this bolt back into the factory hole with nothing attached to it. Now you can see we've got a little bit more slack on this factory wire harness to get that up to the positive post clamp later. Also, we want to address this ground post clamp over here. This is the body ground connection, and it's with it angled this way, it's going to be kind of in our way for hooking up our battery connections later. So we're just going to rotate this ground clamp out of our way. Now the last thing before we set the battery tray down in here is we want to move this little tab that held the factory tie-down bracket in place. We're just going to bend this backwards out of the way so it doesn't bump the bottom of our battery tray. So to do that, I'm just going to use a long screwdriver and pry it back a little bit. That should be good. Okay, now we're ready for the first test fit of the battery tray. We're going to install it with the lion head logo facing the engine. We'll drop the tray down in here. We want to make sure that these legs here are resting flat on the factory sheet metal. So we want to make sure that our factory battery tie-down bracket is back out of the way enough. So if yours is raised up a little bit, you might need to move this bracket back. Also, if it feels like it's not sitting down there quite far enough, if you've got a slight gap, then we may need to trim a little bit of this leg of the fuse box off just a little bit. And I'll show you how to do that if you need to. If the bottom of your tray was bumping against this factory battery tie-down bracket here, you may need to just bang this out of the way a little bit more. So we're going to use a hammer and just move that back, fold this down just a little bit more. Now, if the bottom of your tray was rubbing against the little leg on the fuse box here, it is real important that we get that tray all the way down flush to the sheet metal. So if you need to, just take a second and trim just a little bit of this corner of the leg off, and that way the tray will sit down flush. So you can either trim it with a razor blade, or I'm going to use a Dremel cutoff tool. So I only shaved about 1/4 of an inch off of there. Okay, now let's do another test fit. Okay, now with the tray back in here, it's real important that we look at our mounting holes, and we want to make sure that these holes are fully over flat sheet metal. So here at the front, mine is a little bit close to the front lip of the factory battery tray where it dips down. So I'm going to move this tray backwards just a little bit more. So in order to move my tray backwards just a little bit more, I'm going to get a little bit more clearance on this vertical part of the fuse box leg. So here you can see I just cut away a little triangle piece of that vertical leg support. So let's check it again. We'll drop the tray back in, slide it all the way towards the fuse box, and now that feels a lot better. I've got a lot more flat area under the battery tray. So now we can do a test fit with the batteries in here. We'll drop in our accessory battery first, slide it towards the fender, then drop in our cranking battery. Make sure they both sit flush down on the bottom. And now we're going to check for clearance all the way around the battery tray, make sure everything looks good. You can wiggle this tray around here as much as you need to. Okay, I'll give you a quick tip here when you're trying to get the battery tray aligned. The tricky thing about all of the Toyota vehicles, including the Tundra and the 4Runner, is that there's really no good factory mounting points for us to tie into to get the tray bolted in here securely. So what we have to do is shift the tray around a little bit to get it in place so that we got good clearance all the way around. We're not interfering with the oil fill neck or the oil filter or the AC lines. So if you're anything like me and you're a super OCD, I know you want everything to line up nice and neat and perfect. If the batteries don't sit perfectly perpendicular to the fender or line up with the fuse box, that's okay, don't worry about that. The most important thing is here we're trying to get the battery tray bolted down securely. So most of the Toyota vehicles, the battery tray needs to sit in there slightly sideways. So don't stress it, all we're trying to do is get it bolted in there securely. Okay, so once we're happy with the position of the batteries here, we've adjusted it. Double check, make sure you can get your oil fill cap off. Your oil filter has plenty of room. Your AC lines look good. Everything in here, you're clearing your headlights. Once you get it into the position that you like, we want to make sure that this tray doesn't move when we take the batteries out. So to do that, what I'm going to do is make a couple of little alignment marks here on the tray and something around it so that I can tell if the tray moves when I take the batteries out. So I'm just gonna take a pin here and I'm gonna make a couple of little alignment marks on the tray and on the fuse box to help me make sure it doesn't move. Okay, once you've got a couple of alignment marks so that you can tell if your battery tray shifts around, let's carefully remove the cranking battery first, pull it straight up and out of the way. And then while you're holding onto the tray, slide your accessory battery over enough to be able to get it out. Hold your tray in place while you lift this one out. Okay, so now that the tray is where we want it, we still need to double check all of our holes, all of our mounting holes, to make sure they're on flat sheet metal on the factory battery shelf in here. Okay, so this one looks pretty good, but if your mounting legs are a little bit too close to the edge where the factory battery shelf drops off, then you'll want to put the batteries back in there, get them repositioned, move the battery tray around. Do that as much as you need to get the tray in a good position so that you can get it bolted down securely. So once you're happy with where the tray is located, we can take a center punch, or you can take a pen or a marker and mark the location of your holes that we're going to drill out for the nutserts. So I'm going to mark mine with a center punch. I'm going to start by drilling a small pilot hole first. Okay, everything looks good, so let's open those up to 25/64. Okay, now that we got our holes drilled, I'm going to use a little paint pen to touch up the bare sheet metal so that doesn't rust. I'll show you where my holes kind of lined up down in here. Now, depending on exactly how you've got yours lined up, your holes may be slightly off from where mine are, but this will give you an idea where these holes line up. Now we're ready to install the nutserts, but let's just take a minute to talk about these for a minute, just in case you're not familiar with these steel nutserts, because it is very important that we get these installed properly. So let's just say that, let's just imagine for a second that this washer here represents that sheet metal shelf that we're going to install the battery tray onto. So I went ahead and I drilled this washer out to 25/64. So we're going to take our steel nutsert here and we drop that in there. Now we're going to use the little nutsert install tool that came in your hardware baggie. And when we tighten that bolt down, it's going to compress this nutsert. It's going to compress down and it's going to bite against the back side of the sheet metal and the top side. So I'm going to install one of these here in the vise to show you what that looks like, and then I'll show you how to do it in the truck. Okay, we're going to take our washer and clamp that into our vise. And this will represent the sheet metal and the truck. Now we're going to take our nutsert and drop it through the hole that we just drilled. And then in your hardware bag, you're going to take the grade 8 bolt and the heavy duty washer and then the flange nut, put that on like this. And then we're going to take all of those and start threading it into the nutsert from the top like this. Now we're going to take a 1/2-inch wrench and hold this nut still. And our washer will be on top of our wrench like this. And then we'll take a 7/16 ratchet and start to tighten this bolt down. And as we tighten that bolt down, you'll see that the nutsert starts to compress. If you watch real closely, you can see it compressing. When it gets tight enough, you'll be able to tell that it'll bottom out and you won't be able to go any further. But we want this real tight so that it bites into the backside. Okay, now our wrench is wedged on there, so we're going to just back this bolt off like this, loosen it up. Now when we take the little hardware kit apart, we're going to take this bolt out, and you'll use this on the next one. Now you can see how the nutsert has been compressed up against the back side of the sheet metal. Okay, we're back over at the truck. Let's drop in all 6 nutserts into our holes. and we'll tighten those down. Hold that 1/2 inch nut still with a wrench while you tighten the bolt down with a 7/16. Okay, nutserts are done. Now we can drop our tray back in place and get it bolted down. I'll take our stainless bolt and washer. And we'll tighten those bolts down with a 7/16 socket. Then I'm going to come back and torque these by hand. Okay, our tray is in here nice and sturdy now. The hard part is done, so now we're ready for batteries. Let's drop in the accessory battery, and we'll push it towards the fender. And then drop in our cranking battery. So now we're ready to install the top lid, but I'd recommend leaving these little plastic caps on the battery post because we're about to set a big piece of metal down on these batteries. We don't want to accidentally bump those battery posts. That would be a bad day. So we're going to install this with the Lionhead logo facing the fender. So let's start by securing this lid down using the 4 bolts that come in the hardware baggie. And we'll go ahead and secure that lid down with a 1/2 inch ratchet. Okay, now you may notice that there's a slight gap between the top lid and the battery tray. That's there on purpose. That's because some other brands of batteries, such as the Optima Yellow Tops, those are a little bit shorter because of their design. So we leave that space there if you're running different brands of batteries. So you don't have to squish this lid down and compress the batteries, just get it on there nice and snug. It's not going anywhere. Now we'll start hooking up our battery connections. We'll start with the factory positive over here. We'll tighten the post clamp with a 10mm. And then we'll do the accessory battery positive over here. So if your wire is a little bit long, especially if you're running Optima Yellow Tops, the posts are a little bit further inward from the corner. So you can just kind of push this wire back up into the lid like this. Then we'll move this post clamp to make sure we got plenty of clearance by the fender here and tighten this up with a 1/2 inch wrench. Now the cranking battery negative, and tighten that one with a 1/2 inch wrench. Okay, now we're going to work on the factory negative post clamp here. And what we're going to do is stack these 2 wires in this orientation onto the factory post clamp bolt. But this factory bolt here is not quite long enough, so the last piece in your hardware baggie should be the new post clamp bolt and some nuts. So we're going to go ahead and disassemble this. We're going to take this 10mm nut off of here and remove that bolt. So this part will not be reused. But there is a small square washer on this side of the post clamp, so we will reuse that. We're going to take our new bolt, go through the clamp. Okay, we got our new bolt in there. We'll put the square washer back in place. use one of the nuts from the hardware bag to secure the post clamp to the battery post. So we're going to move our 2 new wires out of the way. Go ahead and put the post clamp on. Make sure this is seated all the way to the bottom of the battery post. We'll go ahead and tighten the post clamp with a 7/16 wrench. Okay, now that we have our factory positive and our factory negative wires connected, we're going to connect the long black wire that links the 2 negative posts together. On some Toyota vehicles, if you've had the battery out for a little while and then you hook the battery back up, you may set off the car alarm. So in case that happens, I'm going to go ahead and grab my door unlock button here. So if the horn goes off, we're just going to hit the unlock button. There we go. Okay, so this is the orientation of these 2 ground wires. So now we'll use our new washer and the last nut to hold those wires in place. And then our last connection is going to be the power wire going from the cranking battery to the solenoid. So we'll remove this nut here with a 12mm. Okay, we're pretty much done with the installation. The last thing I want you to do is just go around and double check all of your post clamps. You want to make sure all of these battery post clamps are real nice and tight. If you can wiggle those post clamps even a little bit, that can cause you all sorts of bizarre electrical gremlins. Also, the factory positive boot cover here, if you want to take a razor blade and notch this to go around the new red wire, you can do that to cover that back up. But let's kind of go through, I'll kind of give you a quick run through of the whole system here so it's a little bit easier to understand now that it's installed. So this battery by the engine is your cranking battery. That's because this one has your factory positive post clamp, and remember that wire feeds your fuse box, your alternator, and your starter. So this one is your cranking battery. This one's going to start the engine, and this one is going to be your accessory battery because this wire feeds power to your bus bars, and the short black wire here feeds your negative bus bar. So any of your aftermarket accessories, like your winch, any heavy-duty cables like a winch, you can run those to the large center stud. Take those heavy-duty cables and go to the center studs on the bus bars here. And then any of your smaller devices, LED lights or a CB or anything else that needs power, needs direct battery power, can go to any of these small circle screws here in the circle. So you'll just run your ring terminal directly to these small screws, and you've got some room along the side of the fender here where you can tuck your wires and get those routed along the fender nice and neat. So anything that you hook up to the power and ground bus bars here will run from your accessory battery, and those devices will not drain down your cranking battery. But remember, like we said earlier, your fuse box runs from the cranking battery, so it is still possible to leave something running, leave the radio on for too long or something like that, and drain down your cranking battery. So if that happens, you've got a backup plan. So right here is your boost button. So when you press this button one time, that will link the batteries together through the solenoid to use the power from the second battery to help start the engine. So when you start your engine, the alternator is going to be charging up the cranking battery first because it comes directly into this battery. So this battery is always going to be charged by your alternator. And then when the smart isolator here sees your cranking battery above 13.2 volts for 2 minutes, it's going to close the contacts inside the solenoid, link this red wire through the solenoid over here, and that way your alternator will start charging up your accessory battery as well. At that point, they're combined together, they're acting like one big battery to run everything in the vehicle. And then as those batteries start to drain down, when they hit 12.7 volts for 1 minute, which is still pretty high, that's still a pretty high voltage, when they hit 12.7 for 1 minute, this is going to separate the contacts inside the solenoid here and leave the accessory battery for running your accessories and leaves your cranking battery for starting the engine later. Now, if you want to have a better idea of what's going on with the status of your batteries, you might want to check out our G-screen monitoring system. So right here built into the kit is a little dust cover. So you pop this cover here, and that's where you install our G-screen monitoring system. So you can watch some of our other videos to get some more info about the G-screen. That's a little 1-inch LCD screen that you can put inside that'll watch the voltage levels on both batteries so you know what's going on. Also gives you an in-cab version of the boost switch. So if your cranking battery is dead, You can hold the G screen down for a couple of seconds and jumpstart yourself without getting out of your seat. Hey, I hope that video was helpful for you. If I missed anything or if you have any questions, please leave us a comment, or you can always email us, info@genesisoffroad.com. But make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel. I've got several other videos on here that kind of help you get the most out of your Genesis products, help you learn how to use these systems to their full potential, and give you some more helpful tech tips. And be sure to give us a thumbs up, and thanks for watching.